KYD Boca Raton, the Health and Wealth Radio Network, 1470 AM and 95.3 FM, the Health and Wealth Radio Network. Wake up with the Steve Kane Show.
Just tell me what your problem is.
With replays overnight, every night. WNN. Talk health, talk wealth, talk politics, talk 1470 and 95.3 FM. WNN. 1470 AM and 95.3 FM. The Health and Wealth Radio Network. Get it straight from the expert's mouth on Ask the Experts with host Steve O. Every Thursday at 5 p.m.
The opinions expressed on the following sponsored program are strictly those of the host, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors. It's Monday night at 9. Time for Sex Talk with Dr. Richard Siegel, a certified sex therapist and sexuality educator. Dr. Siegel is here to answer all your questions about sex and sexuality that you might not have known who to ask. He'll also welcome special guests to talk about a wide variety of topics within the fascinating world of sexuality. So, welcome to Sex Talk.
Good evening. It's Monday night. Time for Sex Talk. Thanks for joining us this evening. My name is Ricky Siegel. I'm a sex therapist, and with me, as always, my brother Larry Siegel, a sexuality educator and clinical sexologist.
How you doing?
We're glad to have you with us this evening. If you're listening on the radio, we're on 1470 AM and 95.3 FM, WNN, and you can watch us on Facebook Live or posted on YouTube. And if you are watching us on Facebook, we'd be so grateful if you go ahead and like the show and share it. We need to spread the word and get people talking about sex.
Absolutely. And you can also write in with questions through Facebook as well, in addition to calling us here in the studio.
There's a button on the page that says send email. Feel free to just hit that and type in a question and join the conversation.
And the number, if you want to call in, is 888-565-1470.
That's it.
I got it. I remembered that.
565-1470.
Yes.
Right. Please call in and join the conversation or ask a question.
Yes.
So, we've been talking for the past couple weeks about sexual pleasure.
Yes.
And how it's just one of those topics that tends to be avoided because usually we're so busy, either squirmy and squirrely and uncomfortable, or focusing on what's wrong with sex and how things go horribly wrong.
Right. But there's another aspect to that, too, where pleasure is often avoided with certain kinds of people. Exactly. Because there's that, there's a tendency, if people are not sort of young and healthy and fresh, there's a tendency to desexualize them. And when we talk about people with developmental disabilities, when we talk about elderly people, when we talk about, those that just are not in that sort of prime area of their life, those are the only people we give sexual pleasure.
Or how about people who are
talk about it
young and healthy and in the prime, but under 18?
Sure. Well, that's another one.
Them too.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. So it seems that when most discussions or most acknowledgments of sexual pleasure are in a very sort of limited segment of the population.
Yeah. Ironically, that's usually people who are the busiest and have the least amount of time for sex.
It is ironic, isn't it?
New relationships, new families, and the people who are the most exhausted are the ones that everybody's telling you're supposed to be having sex all the time. Right? Retirees whose kids are maybe grown and gone and have nothing but time and can use every room in the house, they get a message that, no, you're not supposed to.
Right. You shouldn't want it anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
As we've mentioned on previous shows, it was Viagra single-handedly that kind of ushered in this little quiet revolution, at least in terms of acknowledging sexuality of older people. Right? Remember Bob Dole was a pitch man doing commercials.
And a creepy one at that.
And not as creepy as the Diet Coke or Diet Pepsi commercials he did with the dog whimpering on the floor with the little virgin slut Britney Spears on the screen.
Yeah.
Remember that commercial?
Yeah, all too well.
Creepy. Yeah. So that is our topic, and hopefully we will be having our guest calling in momentarily.
Yes, I'm really excited about that.
Posted on Facebook. We're really happy to have our dear old friend Dr. Mitchell Tepper joining us.
Right. And I believe he's already here.
Mitch, are you on with us?
Not sure if...
I'm on the line.
Hey, there he
Mitchell.
is.
Hey, brother.
There you are. Good to see you.
Great to see you guys.
Thank you for joining us. Mitch is in Atlanta, and we're very proud and honored to have him as part of our faculty at Modern Sex Therapy Institutes, training the next generation of sex therapists and sexuality counselors and educators.
Yeah, and he's been doing some amazing work. I mean, it's since we've known you, we have admired what you've been doing, and it just seems that one after another is these wonderful projects that you're involved in.
Thank you. Thank you. I thought maybe you introduced the show about pleasure because I've been focused on pleasure pretty much my whole career.
Yeah.
Proclaimed prophet of pleasure.
Yeah, we have been. It has been a running theme for the past 3-4 weeks, and how most sex ed is just so focused on tragedy and what can go wrong and the consequences of poor sexual health, and as Larry was just saying, people who we tend to desexualize, like
and I
go ahead,
people with disabilities.
Yeah,
right,
as
absolutely.
A person with disabilities, and as a person who chose to focus in this area, my focus of my research has been on pleasure and orgasm in people with disabilities, and that research, which involved laboratory research, which led into fMRI studies of the brain and different contributions of nerves that we did with people with spinal cord injuries, has informed the whole science of sexual pleasure and the role that the brain plays.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's been, and I've always avoided really the sexual danger and the sexual, negativity. I figured there's enough people who work in those areas, very important areas, prevention and unintended pregnancies, all that is very important. But I thought my special calling was to help people with disabilities and chronic conditions, people who've lost something, maybe even secondary to a surgery, prostate surgery, or hysterectomy, regain that feeling, get something back, optimize their sexual pleasure, optimize their pleasure in relationships.
right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I could say, before met you, God, how long is it? 25 years ago, something like that. But I think the only experience or the only exposure I had up until hearing you talk and getting to know you was when we talk about people with whether it's cerebral palsy or with different kind of disabilities. The only thing that I ever got in terms of exposure was, well, they're targets for sexual predators. Yeah. And we have to teach them how to protect themselves. And that was it. Right? So it really was not a positive type of message.
And even now, and if I'm called in to work with people with kind of developmental disabilities, either young, teenage, or even older, the issues are, of inappropriate behavior, so correcting inappropriate behavior, or questions of consent, and which is also
very important.
Very important question. But I'm never called in when I'm working with, population of people with any type of cognitive impairments or developmental disabilities to give any positive education to help avoid inappropriate behaviors, to avoid, these other kind of dangers you're talking about, avoid being taken advantage of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we just got word this week. Larry was approved to present a pre-con at next year's ASECT conference in Denver on geriatrics and sexuality, and
particularly with dementia
and healthcare facilities and nursing homes, and even I still keep learning new things that just blow me away about consent and competence, and the staff at nursing homes and hospitals. How do they treat old people? They like infants. There's this just revert back to treating them like kids. Like Mr. Smith won't stay out of Mrs. Jones' room, and these kinds of problems.
Right, and just like with dementia, like when you're also talking about with the developmental disabilities and even a lot of physical disabilities, there's this broad brush that we paint it all with, where, the context of sexuality with these individuals is just simply a problem.
Right.
It acting
Right.
out or
That's the phrase,
predatory.
acting out.
Do you get called in to work with orgasm training for people with
Right.
developmental disabilities? Don't really see much of that.
And when somebody's in an institution, the problem becomes institutionalized. It becomes bigger because with no clear policy set, with no understanding, administrators are fearful of not necessarily the patients being exploited, but liability issues.
Right.
Sure.
So
Right.
it's always
It's all about
safer
getting
to
sued.
say no, and to not allow and to ignore than it is to educate and facilitate healthy expressions.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to allow patients, some privacy and dignity when it's appropriate, and allow them
Right.
to be sexual beings.
Right.
Right. Mitch, I don't know if you were at that ASEC conference many years ago in Pittsburgh when the opening plenary session was presented by that Dutch physician, Wout Gianatten. Do you recall?
I'm a dear friend of
you
I'm
know
a
Woot.
dear
Oh,
friend of
okay.
Woot.
Yeah,
Very
and
interesting.
he just, 600 minds got blown all at the same moment when he introduced the idea of palliative sexology. And everyone
Yes.
just went,
Yeah,
"Poof," like, why is he
Yeah.
using that word with sexuality? We usually think of like end-of-life care and hospice and things like that.
Right.
Some very powerful stories I've heard of people, from who were the ones who survived someone and said that those moments were like the most important moments they shared over a lifetime. Even my wife's grandmother, who's passed away, used to tell us very lovely stories about her and her husband, Cheryl's grandfather. How important it was to be so close, during the end of days when the end of days are coming. And so it's very, very important for both parties.
Sure,
Sure,
of course. And yeah, like you said, what could be more important at that deep, intense, emotional time of life? But now we're on to a new project, and we're real excited to have you on and talk about your new documentary. I plugged it on Facebook, and we want everybody to know about Making Love After Making War. This incredible
which we're
film.
just calling Love After War.
Love
now.
After War.
Right.
Just Love After War, loveafterwar.org. Yeah, there was just, I had both. I had Making Love After Making War, the URL Love After War, and the decision was made, just Love After War. And when you say Making Love After Making War, people begin to take that in a lot of places. But it's not that it wasn't meant to be playful, but it wasn't, people just think of basically make-up sex. They really don't even think about wounded veterans, injured, soldiers. So Love After War kind of is a little bit more focused.
Good.
And I know,
it is about intimacy. It's not just about the act of sex. So it really kind of describes, where the film is going more.
excellent.
And of course, you did this with Mark Schoen, another of our old dear friends, who runs Sex Smart Films. And Mark's been a filmmaker and documentarian for a long time. Tell us how you came to work on this with Mark, and just how the project came to be.
Well, I was called on to work with severely or grievously injured veterans in 2006, so going about 11, 12 years ago. And because of my expertise in sexuality and disability, not because I'm a veteran. So a lot of people assume my age and the disability. I'm working with veterans. I'm with veterans, but I'm not. And so, I've kind of had to learn the culture, and I don't claim to be an expert on the culture, and I don't. I claim to be an expert on relationships and intimacy and, overcoming disabilities, both, whether it be physical or PTS or post-traumatic stress or traumatic brain injury. And so, I was doing these conferences each year, the Road to Recovery Conference, and there'd be 100+ families, and no one had gotten anything, even if they were 10, 11 years post-injury. The attendants, both, people with any kind of disabilities, their partners, if they were there, sometimes parents, they were all hungry for information. And I stayed in touch with these folks, and the narrative in 2006, and it's still an important problem, is that failed intimate relationships were the leading cause of suicide, which it was. They do these root cause analysis, and that was the truth. And when I was at Morehouse School of Medicine, when I started working on this, we did look at that as an inroad to look at the intersection of mental health and physical health and sexual health, right? And so we did look at that, but there were positive stories out there, and I always, like I said, I focused on the positive. I focused on who's doing well, instead of just focusing on the problem. And so, I was asked to write a chapter for a book called Hidden Battles on Unseen Fronts. It was the stories of American soldiers with PTSD, depression, and brain injury. And I asked the person who put the book together, send me the stories and I'll write. And that's where Making Love After Making War came out. I figured I'd write this chapter. And then there were no happy endings. So I ended up writing a chapter called The Battle for Love. And then, if you guys know me, sexualhealth.com in 1996, I bought the URL Love After War, Making Love After War. I just saved these ideas for someday. And then I'm like, okay, I got to maybe put this in a book. And then maybe it'll be a photo book. And no, maybe it'd be best as a documentary. And so in our field, Mark Schoen, Dr. Mark Schoen, is the go-to guy if you're going to make a film about sexuality, anything. And so I first approached him maybe 4 years ago at a conference, at an ASIC conference, and I said, Mark, I'm in this film about veterans, and, would you help me out? And he's like, Mitch, you're looking at 3 years of work with no pay.
I can hear him saying that.
He just finished a documentary called Trans, and he just spent 3 years on it. It's not an easy road making a documentary, especially when you're seeking funding and you're doing all the other parts. And so I'm like, I do want to do this, and over the next year or so, my son is at Georgia State, and he had told me about one of his fraternity brothers was at the Cannes Film Festival, and he was a good filmmaker. I'm like, you got to hook me up. So I got Antonio, my son's fraternity brother, another brother that was into music, and my son who did photography. So we had a 3-man crew right there.
Nice.
I had this one couple that had, Kat Causey spoke for me at Walter Reed, and we stayed in touch. So, we got everybody in the van, and we drove off to Alabama, a couple-hour ride from here, and we got the first interview, and brought that again, the interview now to Mark at the Sexual Freedom Summit in Virginia, and I showed it to him in the lobby of the hotel with some headphones, and he watched it. He began to cry. He's like, what can I do for you? So he signed on as director, producer, and it's opened up a lot of doors. And since then, we've gone to 5 more states. So we have 6 couples interviewed, a couple of experts so far. Now we've got a $50,000 matching grant offered on the table.
Beautiful. Congrats.
So we have
wonderful.
the Film Collaborative sponsoring us.
I had the pleasure to see a preview copy when you taught for our class last year, and it is just so powerful, so moving, just an incredible thing. Yeah. And, as we were saying,
33,000.
This is a different kind of disability, because generally these are young, healthy people who go off to serve our country, and then they suffer these traumatic injuries and come back and readjust. I like the sort of subtitle you have, Supporting Intimate Relationships for Wounded Warriors and Their Families. Right? Talk about unaddressed.
Right. And Mitch, if I can ask you on that particular note, because I don't think a lot of people realize how injuries, particularly in wartime, people, I think, understand injuries, but how that may impact sexuality and the ability to really engage in intimate relationships. Can you speak to some of those sort of connecting points?
Absolutely, because, we're talking about trauma-induced, disabilities, whether they be multiple limb loss, a spinal cord injury, burns. So you have overlapping trauma. So when I did this chapter on the battle for love, I created this diagram, and it looked at the symptoms of post-traumatic stress, traumatic brain injury, and depression. So you have like anger and discontrol, easily irritable, withdrawn, numbing, nightmares, right? And so all these symptoms, because the people killing themselves and the people having problems don't always have a diagnosis of PTS or depression or brain injury. But the symptoms, any one of the symptoms can intersect and chip away at what I call the foundations of intimacy. So I put those symptoms against love. Well, love is on the bottom. That's a whole different discussion. But trust, safety, empathy, sleeping together, sex. So I have all these foundational things that are packaged into this thing we call intimacy. And so if you trust and safety are important for this thing we call connection, and your partner has anger outbursts, what does that do to these two things? Love is a different thing, because you may still love your partner, even though you don't feel safe, even though you feel you can't trust them because you don't know what the reactions might be. So, and then sleeping together, right? So if you can't sleep well, or you need to sleep in a different place, or if you're having nightmares and you're thrashing, so that simple act of sleeping together without sex, just sleeping together in the same bed, becomes problematic. And so there we're missing another kind of opportunity for intimacy in that act of simply sleeping together. People manage to have sex, right? I have the most couples with, walking out the door for divorced already, separated, they still manage to have sex, It's just not great sex, Some people aren't having sex, but some people are having sex, but, one partner is grin and bear it. The other partner is just, it's a physiological release, so we want to kind of make the sex better, but we want to really, save a relationship that was good and has fallen apart because of those kind of traumatic issues. And I've had, folks that work with that had like complete spinal cord injury, right? But in combination with like head injury. And it's the head injury that creates more problem in the relationship than complete paralysis.
Sure.
So it's, working on the couple. And I tell people, I'm not going to be able to cure, post-traumatic stress. I'm not going to be able to cure brain injury or spinal cord injury. That's not the issue. We have lots of people working on that. I am working on the relationship and the ability to be in relationship with somebody who is not the same anymore. And, and you have your own baggage, like the partner at home, right? And so each partner has their baggage. So it's easier for you, me, as a counselor, as a, unattached, emotionally attached person to deal with somebody who's having anger outbursts, who's being withdrawn. But when you're living with somebody, it's hard not to take that personally. And so, you have to work with both partners. And I have to say, kind of, unfortunately, sometimes one partner has to be the more stable one, and I tell people, if this person was a good person before they went off to war and before they were this, people say it's not the same person. I said, well, I'm kind of a religious guy, spiritual guy. It is the same soul. It's the same person. They're behaving very differently.
Right.
And they're behaving radically differently because of some terrible things they went through. Right. And so, if you could kind of cut them some slack, and not easier said than done. I mean, so I'm,
of course,
sure,
but more universally,
to happen.
Anytime, even just with illness, sickness, injury, even temporary, when one partner in a relationship becomes a caregiver or a caretaker, that kind of
changes the dynamics.
It's
not a very sexy view any longer. It becomes
very, very interesting, because this weekend I was at a class, and basically the rabbi was saying, why is there good and evil, bad and blah, blah, blah. But, you know, and I know you guys love this stuff, but one of the things is without someone having and someone not having, without someone being able, not able, then there's no ability to give and receive. And so he says, without this discrepancy, there'd be no love, because love is about giving, it's about receiving. And so if everything was the same and there were no problems, you know, it wouldn't be so, you know, you think about, you know, for me, you know, having a child, you're giving to that child. They're not giving back a lot, but you love them more than anything else. Right?
You have to outlast them.
Right.
So that the act of giving sometimes is develops a bond, like people care for their animals. You know, they get something back, and also, you know, the person that's receiving also has other things to offer. They may not be, you know, doing things around the house, but often there's a lot that could come from that, and it's equally important. So it's
sure.
You know, it's just also to manage that. You're talking about dynamics, that caregiver role, and trying to, you know, I'm always saying, okay, caregivers are lovers too. You know, so it's easy to go from lover to caregiver and forget about the lover role.
Right.
Especially, you know, the folks in the film, serious injuries, they have all different, 80% burns, multiple limb loss with testicle injuries and brain injuries, you know, paralysis, complete paralysis, deaf and blind. You know, there's all kinds of disabilities, but there's still everybody's able to give, and everybody's able to add value to that relationship. But what I was saying is that these folks are all people who kind of won the battle for love. There are so many people out there, you know, who haven't gotten there, and especially in the case of brain injuries or post-traumatic stress that have not been well managed. You know, and so when we're not talking any magic pills here, we have to treat as we can the post-traumatic stress, the brain injury, the spinal cord injuries, you know, the multiple surgeries people have after having limbs lost through explosion versus surgery. It's like a chronic condition. It's not just one time.
Right.
So, you know, we have to treat those things, but, you know, without treating the relationship, it's going to go bad.
Exactly. That's the context, I think, for the healing of all that stuff. And, you know, one of the things I want to put this to you before we run out of time, one of the things that I've always really appreciated about the work you are doing, even all that stuff leading up to this, is your focus is not looking at those with these injuries, with the disabilities, with all the trauma-related stuff, from a physical performance aspect. We know that, let's say, for example, women that have mastectomies, that impacts the way they see themselves as sexual beings. Men that can't get erections, that impacts their view of themselves. This has to have that real inside impact on how people see themselves as sexual beings.
Well,
absolutely.
I hate to say it, but you know what the music means.
Yeah.
This half hour whips by way too fast. I hope you'll join us again in the future, and we'll continue this conversation. Loveafterwar.org, right? And Dr. Mitchell Tepper, thank you so much. And thanks, everyone, for joining us. Please like the show and share it with all your uptight friends.
Absolutely.
We'll
Love
be here
you, man.
next
Thanks
Monday
so much for doing
for
this.
Sex Talk. Thanks for joining us.
All right.
Love you, Mitch.
Yeah, bye.
You've been listening to Sex Talk with Dr. Richard Siegel. Join us every Monday night at 9 on WNN, 1470 AM and 95.3 FM. Or watch live streaming video at AMP2 TV Productions on Facebook, or look for the shows on YouTube. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope you'll join us again next week. The opinion